Good morning, everybody. You're listening to the RepcoLite Home Improvement Show, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And this week, it's a full show, absolutely packed. At the end, I'm going to be talking about paintbrushes. You know, when you think about it, there are so many options out there. It can be really confusing. I'm going to give you a bird's eye view, and you're going to know exactly what you're looking for and looking at the next time you're in the brush aisle at RepcoLite. You're going to be the resident expert on brushes. That's coming up at the end. I'll also be in the studio with realtors Prins and Herman talking about the new commission disclosure rules and what that means, you know, for anybody out there buying or selling a home. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the state of the market. So all of that is coming up. But right now, in this little bit that I've got, let's get to the paint point for the week. And this paint point is crazy simple, crazy fast. I want to talk about one of my favorite paint tools of all time. And it's certainly not going to be what you think it is. In fact, no matter what you're guessing right now, you're wrong. Absolutely wrong. Everybody's wrong. Everybody's wrong because the tool that I want to talk about is ridiculous. It's a paint strainer. And if you guessed that, I guess you're right. But really, you shouldn't feel good about that. If that's the tool you went with, you shouldn't feel good. But that's the tool I'm talking about. I'm not saying it's my favorite paint tool, but it is one of my favorite paint tools of all time. And here's why. When I worked at the store, at the Lakewood RepcoLite long ago, periodically people would come in with an old gallon of paint and they'd want me to stir it up, you know, to shake it up if possible, and then tell them if it was still good to use. Well, most of the time, these were really questionable gallons of paint. And basically, they're like the half-full gallons of paint that you've got and that I've got on our shelves at home. You know, there's crusties around the rim that fall in when you take the lid off. There's chunks floating in the paint and so on. You know what it is. You know what it looks like. It's a little sad, really. The paint's still good, technically. It's just got a lot of yuck stuff in it. And that brings me to the paint strainer. These things can save your paint, and it's so ridiculously easy to use them. Here's the scoop. First off, I'm not talking about those little cone strainer things out there. Those stink. You know, they're not for paint. They look like little funnels, and they look like they'd be perfect for straining out your paint, but don't use them for water-based paint. You're going to be there for 6 years trying to get that paint to go through the little netting there. Instead, grab a gallon net strainer. It's cheap. It's basically just a net with an elastic band around it. That's it. You could wear it on your head, that kind of thing. You buy a new empty gallon paint can, and then you put that strainer in the can and then snap that little elastic band around the outside of the can. All right? Put on a pair of cheap throwaway latex gloves and then pour your chunky paint into the strainer that's sitting in the new gallon can. Pour the paint in, and when you're done, grab the elastic band of the strainer and then carefully pull that strainer up out of the can. And as you're doing that, the paint's going to pour out of it quickly into the new container. Then with your gloves on, you kind of just lightly grab the paint-filled strainer as it's over that new can, and then you kind of lightly squeeze out the remaining paint. Right? When you got most of it out, you just throw the strainer away with all the junk in it, and you've salvaged your paint, and now it's in a clean can ready for your next project. Now, I know following all of that info on the radio, kind of tough. It's actually kind of dumb, really, to go over and talk about how to do that on the radio. As I'm saying it, I'm questioning my sanity as I'm talking. But I went through all of it just to let you hear how smoothly and easily that process goes. It's really kind of rewarding. And it's fun to take paint that you thought was no good and make it usable again. So if you've got old, chunky, clunky gallons of paint in the basement, it may be easily salvageable. All you need is one of those little gallon net strainers and a new can. Ask about that stuff at RepcoLite. All right, that's the quick paint point for the week. I know, simple, quick, throwaway point, but tuck it in the back of your mind. Keep it there. Maybe someday you're going to need it. You'll be glad that you know it. All right, now we're going to take a break. When we come back, I'll be in the studio with realtors Prins and Herman. That's all coming up next. Stick around. And we're back. You're listening to the RepcoLite Home Improvement Show, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And I'm in the studio right now with Prins and Herman from Prins Group, 5-star real estate leaders. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
It's been a while since you've both been here. We talk about a lot of different things. Normally we figure out, try to get a kind of a look at what's going on in the market. You guys provide us with that. Try to give us hope. for the people who are selling and buying. It's been turbulent for a while. I don't know where things are now, but right now we've got something else we want to talk about.
Always something.
Yeah, the real estate market's been evolving again lately, and right now we're looking at a major shift, a recent one, in the new rules around agent commissions. Let's just start with that. What's going on with these new rules?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there was a settlement that went into full effect August 17th, and it was a settlement between the National Association of Realtors and a party out of Missouri. And really what the gist of it was about commissions, disclosure of commissions, and disclosure of agency relationships.
For the buyer.
For the buyer, yes, correct.
Okay, so that's the big change. How do these changes, how does it become practical? How does it affect sellers and buyers in Michigan? And to simplify it, let's start with sellers. What do these changes mean for sellers?
So if I'm going to sit down with seller calls me, they want to list their house. I'm going to sit down. We go through the listing agreement. We always have this talk about commission, right?
How much you want.
Yeah, me.
The big pound of flesh that you demand. 50% commission because nothing but the best.
Yes, and commissions have always been negotiable, right? When we sit down with a seller at a table, we always negotiate commissions, right? A seller is going to decide what they're going to pay me, but also if they want to offer up a commission for a buyer's agent. Okay. If they want to offer up a buyer's agent commission, where we have changed is we no longer can post that on our MLS system, which is the multiple listing service. So if you have a search set up or you're looking at listings, that usually it's getting pulled from our MLS system. Mm-hmm. Okay. So now a seller, if they offer up a buyer's agent commission, it no longer can be posted on that system. So a buyer's agent would have to call me, the listing agent, personally and say, is your seller offering up a buyer's agent commission? What is that commission? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So what does that have any practical effect on me? Does it slow down how fast I can sell my house? What does that do for me as a seller?
It could. If a buyer is coming along with a buyer's agent and they cannot afford to pay their own buyer's agent and they see that you're offering up, 0%, 1%, whatever it may be, but it's not enough for that buyer's agent, it possibly could hurt because if they write an offer, you could still get that person you could still get the seller to pay that commission if that buyer writes a strong enough offer, right? As long as they hit their bottom line. But a buyer initially could be a little scared off, like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to purchase this house.
Because they won't see what I'm offering, right?
The buyer's agent will call, correct.
So they'll call and find out, but they won't see
not publicly.
So they'll call and, I'm offering whatever I'm offering.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I guess I don't understand how that changes anything other than the fact that somebody's got to make a phone call.
To an extent, you are correct, right? That it's for buyer's agents, it's now a phone call instead of us just seeing it right online, what they were offering.
And then we've got to get strategic then with our buyers as to how
we write the offer.
We write the offer because if the buyer isn't wanting to pay our commission or can't afford to pay our commission out of the funds that they have, then we've got to be strategic as to how we build it into the seller's offer to the seller so that they would potentially choose our offer based on that bottom line, as Ginger said.
Yes.
I've always said to a seller, who cares who's paying the commission as long as you're happy with your net result, right?
Yep. So I guess another, you were saying, well, what's the change then besides a phone call? For a seller, you might see more unique offers come through. If a buyer...
It's just, people coming up with all kinds of ideas.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what you mean.
If a buyer is trying to get that seller to pay their buyer's agent commission, you might just see, some unique offers come through.
Yeah, because it doesn't have to be that you're asking for the full commission to be paid. For example, you might say, will the seller pay 1% and my buyer will pay the rest or whatever? You can split it. You can negotiate that in.
Yes.
So that's a conversation that a buyer agent needs to have with their buyer, his or her buyer, as to how shall we structure this when it comes time to write the offer, where it will be a winning offer.
Yeah.
I was under the impression those negotiations happened anyway, like regardless of this rule change. There was still
Dan, you're kind of right. Because yes, you are, because this did happen behind the scenes, but we didn't really necessarily always write it right up on the purchase agreement. It was kind of almost a separate document. But when these changes came about, NAR, our National Association of Realtors, kind of stated, you know what, let's just put it on the purchase agreement. So it's almost simplified it a little bit for us to negotiate those commissions.
Okay, so
Because negotiating the commissions was, I don't want to say it difficult, but it was kind of more of like a behind the scenes instead of like, let's bring it right up front, right to the offer.
okay, so that makes sense to me. I understand that.
Yeah.
From a seller's point of view, what I'm gathering is not a huge difference from that seller's point of view. Some differences,
Yeah.
unique offers maybe, and they're not disclosing certain amounts, but
Yeah.
a lot of that stays the same. And the buyers, I mean, I think you touched on some of that, but what are the main changes for the buyers?
The biggest rule change for the buyers was now the buyer agency contract or some sort of showing agreement, we'll kind of specify that, needs to be signed up front before we even walk through a home.
Okay, so that's a major change.
Major.
Yeah, that's
From a seller's point of view, maybe it's not so different. They're going to just ride along okay.
Yes.
yes.
The buyer, there is this upfront agreement that's got to be signed
Yeah,
before you
that's-
can even walk them
Yes.
through
That's
a home.
that's a big
Yep.
confusing. That's a big
Very confusing kind of a thing,
point.
isn't it?
Yes, it's a very confusing point for a buyer. That's a very confusing thing for a buyer because they didn't have to do that before. Now they're having to sign something. Now it might be a single showing agreement.
Let's define this.
Yeah, what
Yes.
is that?
So that would be that you're just basically, as the agent, you are opening the door for the buyer. There's no representation offered here, no compensation, or maybe a flat fee. They might say, well, I'll do this for you for whatever,
$50.
$100 to show you this home.
But the showing agreement is very simple.
Yep.
No obligation.
No obligation.
Don't have to work with me in the future. Don't have to pay me.
So I find a house I want to look at. I call somebody, I get a realtor on the phone and say, I want to look at this house. And they say, okay, here's these two different, meet me out there or whatever. You're going to have to sign. You have to sign
have to sign
one of
one.
these two things before I can open the door.
This is part
One
of the
them-
new rule. Yes,
One
the new
of them
settlement.
would be a showing agreement, which
Yep.
says you'll let me through, but that's
That's it.
it.
Yep.
I'm not obligated
Yep.
Correct.
to work with you in the
Yep.
future.
Yep.
And then
And if the other one is you get some of my
Yep.
kids or something. Is that how that
Only
works?
one.
Only
one.
one.
Firstborn.
Okay.
No, the other one would be a buyer agency agreement. And then that's going to spell out the terms, the type of service, the scope of your service, the fee, who pays the fee. That all gets spelled out on the buyer agency agreement.
And view that as more of a buyer has decided to use that agent as their own personal buyer's agent. You're going to sign a buyer agency contract.
And then that's who I'm using.
Yes.
So I'm
And
making
like
a
she-
big decision at
Yes.
that point.
And like Sue said, how long are we going to work together and how am I going to get paid?
All of that's in that agreement.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
But I've got to sign one of those two
Correct.
before
Yes.
I move forward.
And Sue and if we're going to meet someone brand new, we could sign a buyer agency, but we encourage them to sign just the showing agreement because we want to make sure they like us, they are comfortable with us as an agent. And we also want to make sure
we want to know we want to work with them too.
yeah, that we want to work with them too, right? This is a mutual agreement between
Yes.
both of us wanting to work together. So if a brand new person calls us, we're going to just show up at the house, no obligation to us, sign the showing agreement. If you decide you want to work with us, let's sit down and let's fill out the buyer agency contract.
And
that
again,
how-
that's how Ginger
That's
and
how
I
you
do
it.
that.
That's not industry standard, though,
no,
necessarily.
no, there's no, yeah.
There might be others that just simply want to first sign the buyer agent's agreement. If I'm going to show you this house, I want to work with you.
Have you run into that where you've
Yes.
talked to
Yeah.
anybody who's
Yes.
called somebody and they've told them you've got to sign a buyer's agreement?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
In
And
order to go through the house,
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
requiring that.
Yes.
And that's
That's got to bring up some
It's
confusion.
scary
it's
for
scary.
buyers.
Yeah, I was going to say
That
that's
would be
scary.
very confusing.
Very
right? I think that's how
confusing.
Sue says it.
Yes. Well, I mean, you can only imagine. You're a buyer and you want to see a home, and all of a sudden you're being asked to sign an agreement with an agent you've never met, and
they're asking for money.
they're asking for money, and they're going to represent you through this whole transaction. You don't know them; they don't know you. I get it why they're uncomfortable with that. We're uncomfortable with that, as we said.
So if somebody out there listening calls to look at a house and that's what you hear, That's not the only option.
Right.
Correct.
The new law doesn't put that in place. There is a secondary option that they can find maybe by checking with another realtor if that's the case.
Correct.
Right.
But they should be aware they are going to be asked to sign something.
Right.
In order to open the door.
Right. No
because
surprise
that's now,
there.
as U.S. nation, we have to sign something to open the door.
Yeah.
Any other major changes that are affecting the buyers from your point of view?
I would say what's coming out, through all of this is, even though commissions have always been negotiable, sellers who didn't know that are like, oh, I can offer up a different commission, whereas maybe they thought they had to give a certain amount. That's, I think, the biggest change that we are seeing, especially as buyer's agent and listing agents, because as we call for a buyer to find out what that listing is offering, then we're going back to our buyer. Here's what they're, maybe they're only offering me 1%, and I personally want to seek out more. Don't worry, let's still see the house. Let's walk through. If you decide you want to write an offer, we can get unique. We can write in, clauses. Maybe let's write a little bit higher amount and ask the seller to pay for that commission. Buyer, are you willing to?
So they're paying for their commission by
kind of lumping it into the price.
Rolling it in.
Yes, which is cheaper for them to have it, on
and
top
to cough
of
up money right off.
Yes, because some people don't have the cash up front, but they can pay for it over time on their mortgage statement. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, that is different. And I think it's important for buyers and sellers to be working with agents that understand these new rules and practices, because there's the nuances as to how you're going to write it and be strategic, especially as you're working for a buyer and they only have so much cash to work with. You got to have those conversations up front to know what your strategy is moving forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you were to give advice to somebody, right now looking to buy or sell under these new rules, what advice you got? Just that? Seek out a good realtor.
That's a big one.
realtor.
Yeah.
I'm going to tag along
Do you guys
with
put that on your website or something? I'm one of the good ones. That
No,
way
but we
could,
should.
We should.
Dan, and then
Yeah. I'm in marketing.
I'll say Dan said.
Yeah, Dan says they're one of the good ones.
I'm
You
gonna
guys
tag,
pick which one I'm talking about.
I'm going to tag that with also a good lender, because lenders that know these changes and understand them well, when they meet with the buyer, they're going to say, how much cash do you have to work with? Okay, let's divvy out that cash. You have some closing costs, you have your down payment. They might tell them you don't have money left over to pay an agent. Let's find you a good agent that knows how to write it in the offer so you don't have to pay that. Does that make sense? So that's a big one. And then I just want to touch upon too with the sellers that used to think they didn't have the money to pay agents and they were trying the for sale by owner. Call us first. Let's sit down. Let's put up a net sheet together and let's see, because I've had clients that have tried the for sale by owner and then they come to me and they realize, oh, we could actually make this work. We can use an agent and we can afford to pay a buyer's agent. So just sit down with like you said, a good
big
agent.
Thing you're doing. I mean, how often do we do something that large?
Right.
Yeah.
Whether it's a purchase or selling, and then most likely a purchase.
Right.
People don't just not buy a new house.
Yeah.
Right.
They can't just work that into the deal. I'm going to stay in the basement. It's pretty nice down there. All right. Okay. I think that kind of gets us through that part of things. I did want to still talk about what the market looks like. So I'm wondering, can you wait with me over a break?
Sure.
Yeah.
And then we'll get back to looking at the prediction for what we're looking at for selling and buying in general. All right, I'll be back in the studio with Ginger and Sue in just a minute. Stick around. And we're back. You're listening to the RepcoLite Home Improvement Show, sponsored by Benjamin Moore, and I'm still in the studio with Sue Prins and Ginger Herman from Sue Prins Group 5-Star Real Estate Leaders. Ladies, thanks for hanging out with me over the break.
No problem.
Yeah.
We had a big time, right?
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah. Sat around talking, waiting to talk some more. So let's talk some more. Let's look at the bigger picture this time of the real estate market. We talked about, just some commissions and some rules and law changes, and I had to do everything I could to stay in that and to not get lost in the terms. But now let's look at just real estate in general. What are we seeing? Are we seeing more of a buyer's market now? Is it more of a seller's market now? Is it something in between?
Yeah.
What's going on out there?
It's a great market right now, don't you think, Ginger?
We are in a good market.
Yeah.
Is that sarcasm?
No.
For the other shoe to fall?
No, it's like kind of a perfect storm. It's a great time for buyers to buy and sellers to sell.
For both, yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Interest rates are at a nice rate right now.
We're lower than what we were earlier this year, so that's good.
All right.
I had a lender explain it to me this way. In fact, Josh Nora with Northern Mortgage, I talked to him yesterday. I'm like, from your perspective. And he's like,
From mine?
No, from I'm sorry.
We didn't talk about you.
We didn't know. We didn't
I was
bring you
so
up.
excited that somebody.
No, from Josh's perspective. I'm like, what are you thinking? Here's what I'm thinking. But he's like, 2 years ago, everybody kind of freaked out because remember the interest rates went crazy. And so buyers paused.
Yep.
And then a year ago, the interest rates, they dropped and then they kind of went back up again. And then people kind of freaked out again and holding. And now here we are where the interest rates are down. The market's looking great. It's affordability. Well, we're not in the craziness of the spring. Mm-hmm. We're now kind of coming down from that.
What do you mean the craziness of the spring?
So when you got crazy multiple, crazy multiple offers, now we're kind of coming, we're already in our winter market, even though it's fall, right?
Like maybe only 2 or 3 offers if you're in a multiple offer situation. Maybe none. I have plenty of buyers that are competing against no one right now.
So Josh was like, jump in the pool because, there's not a whole lot of water left in the pool, meaning there's not a lot of listings out there.
No.
And yet you're not in this crazy multiple offer situation, right? So jump in, make an offer. You may find yourself in multiple offer situations. We're not saying there aren't any, but
it's just lower,
right?
So,
and yet sellers are still doing great on prices because prices are still up.
Yes.
So,
if you view prices from earlier this year to now, they are still up.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And there are still some holding out because they're thinking, well, maybe I'm going to wait till after the election. We know what we know now, but we don't know what's going to happen after. We can speculate. We've listened to economists, speculating, but we know what we know now. We know that the interest rates are really good yet. Yep. And not comparably to 3%, which I doubt we're ever going to see again, or 2%.
For those buyers listening that are waiting for that, don't wait any longer because it's just not going to happen. No. It would be pretty drastic if we went back down to the 3s.
What are we at right now? Do you know?
So like high 5s, low 6s.
Low 6s.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
That range.
Yeah.
So what does the inventory look like? You said the inventory's low, but are the people, there's not tons of people looking right now? Or how is that balance out all right?
Well, our inventory is low, but it's not crazy low.
Okay, not like it had been.
Correct. Yeah. Right. So there are still
50,000 people in 3 houses.
Let me explain it this way. Where homes were sitting on the market 7 days or less, now they're averaging more like 14.
Yes.
Maybe some a little longer depending on. But I just sold a over $1 million home just a couple weeks ago, and it was only on the market 4 days. So, I mean,
I thought Sue was trying to talk herself up there for a second.
Well, I kind of was. Did you catch that? No, but I mean,
you're right,
4 days for an over $1 million home.
Yep.
Was really good, right? So, so it doesn't really matter the price range. Homes are still selling.
Yeah.
But I would say average wise, some are sitting a little bit longer, that.
And I think it's partly because some of those sellers still think that we're in those prices of the summer, meaning like where we had all that competition. So maybe they, buyers are looking at, they're like, oh, I'm not going to do that price because now I have to overpay for that. So maybe that, listing price was a little bit higher than what they should have posted.
Yeah, that is so true.
So
that's where I think that's where some are sitting.
Down or should be coming down.
I don't want to call it down because it's very slight. It's just
which is where I was going to go because it's still good.
Yes.
It's still a really good price.
Yes.
But it's maybe not quite what it had been.
Yep.
In the summer.
Yeah.
And
good way to put it.
And we're probably going to ride out this market. We're probably going to see this for a while now, heading into winter. Mm-hmm. And yes, the election year always changes our real estate market because, like Sue said, people get concerned. Mm-hmm. But whoever gets into office, our economy is not going to change. Heading into winter, spring, right? Like we're not going to see these big changes.
Right.
So
Agreed.
maybe for investors because of capital gains tax, but do it now while people are still concerned about who's going to go into office because you're going to have way less competition. Once someone goes into office come November, will buyers kind of have this sigh of like, okay, now I know who's in office. Now I'm ready to buy.
Sure.
Will we have this influx of buyers out there? We don't know.
We don't know.
No, it's different stuff, but we talk to painting contractors, that's what I do. And this summer at a bunch of events, talked to a lot of different people that were saying, yeah, it's a little bit down this year. They're a little bit slow. Not all of them, but a number of them. And they said, yeah, it always happens every 4 years, every election cycle.
Yep.
And they said exactly that. People wait to see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then when they know what's going to happen, then they start making their purchases again. It's not even so much that, it's that person, I'm not going to do anything.
No.
It's just we need to know.
They just want to know.
I need to know what's going to happen.
You
Now
nailed it.
I can start moving again. So you're saying,
And so then you have more people jumping in the pool.
and that's where things are going to get a
guess
little
what?
crazier.
Yeah,
and
then it's
spring is
crazier.
always crazier
It
anyway.
always
That's a
is.
bigger push.
Yeah,
so now's
right.
a great time.
Yeah. Yeah. And Josh Norrod, again, I want to mention, he said his prediction is that the interest rates probably aren't going to do big fluctuations now.
Correct.
So that's good to know too, right?
Yes.
We don't know after the election, but because of what happened with the Feds recently, they've already done their drop. He doesn't predict that we're going to see another drop.
Sitting here for a little bit.
Yep.
Probably.
And
Inventory's decent.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
You're not fighting
Yeah.
with all kinds of people, all kinds of sharks, like we talk about in the tank, to get your offer. I love the idea of not having to have multiple offer, having all of that. As a buyer or as a seller, that's probably great.
Yeah.
But as a buyer, oh my gosh, the stress of that.
Yeah.
That's minimized.
Yes. Well, and it's important, again, we're going to say again, it's important that you have a good agent looking out for you as a buyer, because then you and they are watching together when that house pops up that meets that criteria of that buyer. We still want to get them in there right away. I always say I like to be the first one in the door or the last one in the door. The first one in the door, if I'm not competing, let's get this thing written and let's get it under contract and not be in a competing situation. Or the last one in the door, if I am competing, so I know what we're up against. So get a good agent who's watching what you're looking for together and make that move. Now's the time, right?
Well, and I don't want sellers to be concerned when we say, low, not as many buyers, right, in the pool, because I will say the buyers that are in the pool are serious buyers. They know what they want. They're ready to make an offer. And so that's the buyers that you do want. You don't want 25 showings and only one offers. You want the serious buyers, and that's who's currently on the market. So it's a good time to sell.
Good point.
Yeah, so definitely contact an agent. So many reasons. I mean, generally speaking, I like to pinch pennies and stuff. So when I bought houses I bought houses. When I bought a house. And then when I moved, we did a lot of it for sale by owner. And, there were so many aspects of that I thought I was doing myself so well. I was doing it. And I am a terrible negotiator. I'm absolutely horrible because I'm terrible at it, but also because it's embarrassing to some extent to try to get a price down. To me, that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
So I always, whatever I buy, you want to see me walk onto the property because whatever you're offering or what the price is, that's what I'm going to give you. Cars, you name it, I will give it.
Yeah, sounds like my husband. I told him the last time we bought a car, I said, you stay in the car. I'll do the negotiating.
No.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will get them to go down, but I will come up with some ridiculous number that's so ridiculously, just a tiny little fraction.
Yes.
But getting somebody who knows, first off, I wouldn't even know if the price is inflated.
Yeah.
I don't have that info. You guys have that info. You can make that recommendation.
True.
Yep.
And you're not embarrassed to make the negotiations and to fight for my best interest. So definitely, I think that's a really smart thing.
And as Ginger was saying, we are seeing some of that where the prices are inflated. So you need a great agent who's going to be able to determine that for you.
Yeah, so you've got to go to the website. You've got to look, and it should say right on their header, I'm one of the good ones.
Yeah, right.
And then you'll know.
Dan Hansen.
Yeah.
Dan said,
I will give the thumbs up. So all the realtors are going to be writing in looking for that thumbs up.
Yes.
It's a stringent process to get it. I don't just hand that out willy-nilly. There's money that's involved. No, that's just all a joke. If our listeners have more questions, they want to get in touch with you. Maybe they were wondering about what we talked about in the first segment, the new rules and all of that.
yeah,
All
don't
that.
listen to the media. Come to us.
Right.
Yeah.
They heard this in the media.
Although
too.
this is media.
Yeah, okay. Listen to this part of the media.
Yes, right.
Maybe not others. I don't know. You decide.
Yes.
So if they've got questions about that, if they
Yes.
want to get you guys to help them buy a house, sell a house, how's the best way to get in touch?
Sue Prins, 616-723-2400 or
Ginger Herman, 616-633-5880.
And you guys, Ginger, you're Sue's daughter, right?
I sure am.
Yeah, I think we
I'll
said
claim
that
her.
long ago on one of the first episodes, and I
Yes.
thought, the way you guys nitpick each other,
yeah.
and then not all of it
family.
makes the air, but they go back and forth in the
Makes
studio.
more sense.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Yeah, I want people to know that's what's going on. Anyway, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Dan.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to make everybody out there resident experts on paintbrushes. That's all coming up next. Stick around. And we're back. You're listening to the RepcoLite Home Improvement Show, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And we're going to wrap things up with a trip to the brush aisle. Pretty exciting stuff. But when you look at paintbrushes in the store, really, it's honestly insane. It's crazy. I work here and I think it's crazy. There are so many options. You know, you look at them, they largely look the same. Then you look closely, you notice all these little differences. Which one's right for your project? You know, what's the point of all these differences? Well, let's go through a quick overview and cover the basics so you'll have a better handle on what you're looking at next time you're standing there. All right, let's start with the big picture. Brushes generally fall into two main categories, natural and synthetic bristles. Now, natural bristles, often called China bristle brushes, they're made from animal hair, really. Animal hair, like hog hair, ox hair, badger hair, horse hair, yak hair. I don't know. If it's an animal and it's got hair, chances are somewhere, somehow, somebody in history rounded it up, cornered it, shaved some of that hair off, put that hair on a stick, and made a paintbrush out of it. Those are natural bristle brushes. And those brushes are best suited for oil-based paints for any number of reasons, but they apply oil-based products, paints, varnishes, and stuff like that. They apply it so evenly and so smoothly. Now, with that said, you don't want to use a natural bristle brush with water-based paint. Water causes those natural bristles to swell up, to kind of lose their shape, and ultimately it can ruin both your brush and the paint job. Been there, done that on accident, so I can attest to that. It's the truth. Don't use natural bristle brushes with water-based products. For water-based products, synthetic bristles are the way to go. Now, the main synthetic materials out there that you're going to run into are polyester, nylon, and Chinex. And oftentimes, you're going to see that brushes use a combination of two or more of these to achieve different characteristics for their brushes. And we'll get to more of that in a little bit. All right, but those are the main two categories, natural bristle brushes and synthetic bristle brushes. And for the sake of this conversation, we're pretty much done with natural bristles at this point. Most of the time, if people are putting on paint these days, it's a water-based product, and so we're talking about synthetic bristle brushes. So that's where we're going to focus on the rest of this time here. And let's break down all those different bristle types. I just mentioned what they were, Chinex, nylon, and polyester, but let's get a little more specific so you understand what each one does, the characteristics of each of those filaments. Now, Chinex bristles, and I know that sounds so exciting, right? The characteristics of these filaments, but it'll be good. It'll be good. Just listen along and you'll be excited. You'll be enthralled. Chinex bristles, they're incredibly durable. Chinex brushes keep their stiffness even in humid or hot conditions, and they're designed specifically to handle the challenges of low VOC paints, modern paints. Chinex bristles release paint easily. They give you a really smooth application, and a super huge bonus, my favorite bonus, they clean up crazy fast. So Chinex bristles, love those. Nylon bristles, they're durable, really durable, but they're also much softer than the other two bristles that we're going to talk about, the two filaments that we're going to talk about. That can be great. That soft filament can be great for a smooth finish, but keep in mind that nylon filaments are going to soften even more in hot weather or with extended use in latex paint. So if you're doing detail work, the softening might make things tricky or frustrating. So that's nylon. A little bit soft, really durable, but really soft. Polyester bristles, the third one. They're the stiffest of the bunch, and they'll hold their shape and maintain their control in hot conditions, but they don't hold as much paint. So you might find yourself dipping into the can more often. Now, generally speaking, 100% polyester bristled brushes, they're just not recommended. You're better off finding brushes that blend polyester with nylon or Chinex or both for better performance. All right, so those are the main 3 types of filaments. We're talking about softness and stiffness of those bristles. Why does that matter? Well, when you're choosing your brush, that is something that you need to consider. And what drives that is what you're working on or working with. You know, for shinier finishes, or if you're working on smooth surfaces like doors or trim, a softer brush is really going to help minimize visible brush strokes, and that's going to give you a cleaner look. So that's where the soft bristled, soft filament brushes are really going to shine. On the flip side, if you're doing cut-in work around windows, doors, or trim, a stiffer brush is going to give you more control for really crisp, clean lines. Now, there are a lot of options on the market, a lot of brushes on the market that offer, a medium stiffness or whatever they call it. There's a lot of different names that get used for this category. But really, these are different blends, and these medium stiffness brushes offer a really good balance for most projects. So keep that in mind. All right, so that's the stiffness or softness of the filament. What about the cut of the brush, the angle or the flat? What's up with that? Why do you have one or the other? Why would you choose one or the other? Well, an angled brush, the idea behind these is that it's going to give you more precision when you're doing your cut-in work. Like when you're painting the edges where the walls meet the ceiling. That angle lets you see what you're doing a bit better, perhaps, and it helps you get into the corners with more control. Now, that said, plenty of experienced painters swear by flat brushes for cut-in work. They may be swearing at the radio right now because that's how deeply they believe this. They love the flat brushes and they will use them all day long. Really, at the end of the day, it's all about technique and what you're comfortable with. You can make both work for whatever you're doing. Some contractors prefer to use angled brushes for detail work and then switch to flat brushes for larger areas. Other ones like to use the flat brush for everything. For DIYers, generally speaking, I think for cut-in work, you're going to be happier using the angled sash. All right? So, what about the handles? Last thing I've got time for. Let's touch on those briefly. There's a lot of different kinds of handles, a lot of different shapes. I'm only going to look at 4 of them. Rat tail handles. They're long and thin. Love the name. Who doesn't want to grab a brush by its rat tail handle, right? Anyway, they're long and thin. You kind of hold them like a pencil. There's beaver tail handles. They're rounded, and that handle fits comfortably in your palm. There are fluted handles. They're more square in shape, but they've kind of got rounded edges, and that makes them really easy to grip in your hand. And then there's short handles, little stubby guys, and they're ideal for working in tight spaces. That's what us stubby guys are good for. We can really fit into those tight spaces, and we don't get a crink in our neck or anything like that. So there are those stubby, short-handled brushes, great for those little areas. The key with handles, it's really all about finding a brush that fits right and feels right in your hand. The more comfortable you are, the more productive you're going to be. So that's really what the handles are all about. There's no other big trick to it, except the stubby ones. Those are good for like I said, the tight areas. But the other ones, it's really, how does it feel in your hand? So when you're buying a brush, don't just read the packaging. Make sure that you're holding the brush and checking it out to make sure it feels right. One last thing I'll mention before we wrap up the show, we've got some of these brushes on sale right now. The only one I've got time to mention, the Corona Excalibur. I talk about it on the show all the time. It's a Chinex brush, cleans up crazy well, applies paint beautifully. It's my favorite brush. You can get a 2.5-inch Excalibur for $12.26 till the end of October. That's almost $11 off its regular price. So if you do any amount of painting at home, buy one of these. Get one of these, put it in your paint kit. You'll be glad that you've got it. All right, that's it. That's all the time we've got. We're going to wrap it up. If you want to catch this one again, you can find it online at RepcoLite.com. Whatever you do today, make sure paint's a part of it. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you next week. I'm Dan Hansen. Thanks for listening.